And now the work commences. Welcome to another tidbit from the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. I'm Dr. Paul Peterson, and we have read in Nehemiah chapter 3. When you read this chapter, it looks like a long list of different people, and that is actually what it is. It is a description of the work that took place when the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt. We read from the beginning, Eliashib the high priest and his fellow priest went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100. And then the next is described, the fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassenaah. And then he moves on and on, describing various places in Jerusalem, along the walls, places that were rebuilt, and then who did it. This is like an honours list. And that would have been important. In the centuries to come, any Jew who descended from one of these builders could give his genealogy, could list it and tell, my ancestor, my grandfather was on the wall. We're building the walls of Jerusalem. He's mentioned here. You can imagine the importance of that for identity. So there's a good reason that Nehemiah would list not only the places but also who actually took part in building the walls of Jerusalem. Let's think a little about that particular expression. In Psalm 51:18, the psalmist says, "Do good to Zion in your good pleasure," speaking to God. "Build up the walls of Jerusalem." Now that has not necessarily anything to do with the physical walls, as if it has to be after a period of destruction of the walls. Now, this is now an idiomatic expression. To build up the walls of Jerusalem is another way of saying, protect us. Give us peace. In the ancient world, as throughout history, of course, walls have been needed because there were enemies. Walls were needed for protection. And a city without walls would normally either be so strong that there were no enemies who dared attack it, or it would be attacked and conquered. In the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah had prophesied, "Behold, I am calling all the tribes of the kingdoms of the north, declares the Lord, and they shall come, and every one shall set his throne at the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem, against all its walls all around, and against the cities of Judah." That is in the first chapter, in verse 15, as Nehemiah is called to become a prophet who proclaims that the walls of Jerusalem and its temple will be destroyed. That happened. And later in Nehemiah 52:14, quoted also in 2 Kings 25:10, Nehemiah tells that all the army of the Chaldeans, as that is the Babylonians, who were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Zechariah, sometime before Nehemiah actually, had prophesied that Jerusalem shall be inhabited as villages without walls, because of the multitude of people and livestock in it. You might not need the walls anymore. But even so, in the book of Revelation, when the heavenly Jerusalem is described, it still has walls. They are there because they are mighty, they're beautiful, but it is also stated in verse 25 in chapter 21 of Revelation about Jerusalem, that its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. So peace will be secured. The walls were there for peace. In the days of Nehemiah, for necessary, practical, political peace, asking God to build the walls of Jerusalem. Now, in the following chapter, chapter 4, we will realize that there is a reason for the walls. There are enemies who want to prevent Jerusalem in reaching its liberty. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, it is said in chapter 4, verse 1, he became angry and greatly incensed. Now, I read today from New King James Version. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of the associates and the army of Samaria, he said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Tobiah the Ammonite was at his side in chapter 4, verse 3. What they are building, even a fox climbing up on it, would break down their walls of stones. Nehemiah's response had two aspects. The first one was a prayer. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. That prayer is not the most kind prayer you can find, because he does ask God to punish the enemies. That is a natural prayer for protection. The second response in verse 6 is, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. So the response is twofold. They pray to God, and they show courage, and they work on. The response for the enemies is part of the continuing story. In verse 7, when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. So they plotted together. Now, who are these people? Actually, these are representatives of the provinces around the province of Judah. To the east, Judah had a boundary to the Dead Sea, and on the other side of the Dead Sea, the province of Moab. But it shared a land border with the next province to the north of Moab, that is Ammon. And then you move west, and the next province was Samaria, and west of the province of Judah was the province of Ashdod, the old Philistine area. Ashdod was one of the 5 Philistine cities of ancient times. The province to the south, Idumea, seems not to be mentioned here, and it seems not to have been as hostile as the others were, but they plotted together. And at first their strategy was to attack in secret and during the night probably to surprise the Jews in Jerusalem and kill them and stop the work. However, there were some Jews living among these areas, and they revealed the secret to Nehemiah, so they were prepared. So by that, the attacks were prevented for a time, but the remainder of the chapter reveals how the people in Jerusalem had to work with a constant fear of being attacked. So they brought weapons, they had weapons ready. They were called to be ready when the trumpet sounded, because they were spread around the wall working, not all in one place. So there are a couple of appeals by Nehemiah to the people. In verse 14, he says to the people, don't be afraid of them, that is the enemies. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. This is a call for what we could call a holy war. In verse 20, wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So they were ready, and ready to give the signal to be prepared for fight. They didn't have to, but they were ready. In order to be prepared, Nehemiah ordered as we read in verse 22, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night. Nobody had permission to leave, so they always, in case of attack, would have all the troops ready. Be prepared. It's like a Pathfinder motto. Be prepared. Be ready. Or as stated by Jesus in another context, but most likely also with a certain reference to this situation in the book of Nehemiah. No man, having put his hand to the plough and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Those people who worked on building the walls of Jerusalem had dedicated themselves fully, full-time to the task, not looking back. Always be prepared. Be committed fully to serve God in rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. That is a message from Nehemiah 4. Thank you for listening to yet another tidbit from Nehemiah. I'm Dr. Paul Peterson, and I will welcome you back for our subsequent tidbits. Thank you.